Welcome to Pirate Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking politics and commiserating a little bit, Jeronimo.
Yeah.
The Cougars fell a little short, kind of a bummer. We wish we could have seen them, advance and get that championship trophy. But great to see them in the Final Four.
Oh, absolutely.
Happy to see. One other element of disappointing this week is if you look at your 401k,
I haven't.
The balance of your retirement account. Don't recommend it. Things are not going
I'm not going to.
Great.
I'm not going to.
One economist described this as economic nuclear winter. The market lost basically upwards of $6 trillion on that span of a few days.
It's too many zeros, man.
A lot of zeros.
I just don't know. I read the opposite, and they said between 2 and I think it was 2 years, more or less, will be fine. So it's like, okay, I'm still within that.
Yeah, exactly,
but after that, I'm retiring. So I don't. Oh, but then you take a hit. Yeah, it's complicated.
It's complicated, yeah.
Oh,
well, and I think that is the problem, right? That a lot of people are trying to figure out what the kind of sort of Venn diagram is here on how the politics of this work with the financial elements of it. The numbers are pretty staggering. We won't go through all the details, but basically with the reciprocal tariffs and with the tariffs that the White House is putting on things, you're talking about 104% tax on consumer goods from China, which is most of what people buy, a 46% tax on clothes from Vietnam, 24% tax on Japanese machinery, a 20% tax on European food and drink. I know you like your bougie French wine, so you're going to be paying 20% more, my friend. Get ready for that.
Well, and also the Heard and McDonald Islands, right? That is inhabited by penguins.
They're going to pay too.
Yeah,
like,
10%.
They've been ripping us off for years.
Yeah, 10%. Yeah. So I don't understand what is the end game because what it's creating is a lot of uncertainty.
Right.
And markets and investors, they do not like uncertainty.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole problem here is that it's going to increase or perhaps potentially increase inflation. It's going to increase the cost of essential goods like your beer. Is going to increase financial planning for businesses, consumers, et cetera, et cetera.
What if I drink bottled beer? Is that going to be...
I think I don't know. I don't know if bottled beers are made here.
I'm worried. Everything seems to be going up, and nothing seems to get coming down. And that's the problem for the White House, right? The implicit assumption here from like the kind of campaign was that we're going to reduce prices. I mean, he said day one. Everybody says, okay, that's just a kind of bloviation. But certainly it's the case that they expected it pretty soon. And in fact, people are getting the opposite. I don't want to alarm people, but like I'm a film buff, as you know, and like the Austin Film Society is running The Grapes of Wrath this week, which is not like a great indicator of like where things are headed. So I think it's a coincidence. I hope it's a coincidence. But that's a real issue. The other issue, I think, for me is the financial problems aside, it's about the messaging from the White House. They've been inconsistent in how they've delivered it. And when they have delivered a message, especially from President Trump, it's been, I think, a little bit too harsh. He said stuff like, you need to get tough, right? And it's just going to be a little bit of a pinch. What does he say? Don't be weak, don't be stupid, don't be a panican, I guess, instead of an American. I don't think this is the right sales point, right? I think they're better off, and actually their internal polling shows exactly this, that they're talking about the long game. So you mentioned sort of what is going on here. I think what they want is really a kind of resurgence of domestic manufacturing. You, I think, made a great point last week, as you always do, and that's that this takes a long time to happen. Yeah. So, you can make that case and maybe people will buy it for a little bit, but the halo will soon, I think, lose its luster, and it's going to be harder for him to convince Republicans to pull through on this. The other thing, too, is that there's a kind of non-panickiness to the White House that seems to be troublesome. So, for instance, the White House issued a statement this weekend saying that the president won this senior club championship trophy. Yeah. It's almost like kind of eating cake while like the country burns. That's, I think, a kind of worrisome figure here. And some of the numbers actually suggest that the kind of impact is going to be pretty bad for him. He's underwater when it comes to net approval. Disapproval is over 50% for the first time in the second term. Economic policy approval is at negative 15. Tariffs are underwater by 30. This is not a good spot to be in.
And the problem here, as we have said, is that it's not about understanding how trade deficits work in terms of consumer goods, in terms of raw materials, the service industry, anything like that. You go to the supermarket and you see it.
Right.
Period. End of story. So that is going to complicate things. Once again, I'm sorry to say this, we are months away from 2026. And
more bad news, you say.
Yes, and it could be a debacle for Republicans.
Right.
Republicans, when they go to town halls, they're going to be, they have been yelled at, screamed at, by their own constituents. So it's something very complicated. And then on the other hand, you have, I guess, the Senate, one way or the other, saying like, hey, maybe based on Article 1, Section 8, maybe we should have a little bit of a say and not let the executive branch do this stuff that is crazy. And among all people in the world, right? Our own senator, junior senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, is saying, maybe let's rethink this a little bit more.
Yeah, be careful. This could be a political problem. Not for him because he just got reelected, but for his buddy John Cornyn, right? Who, by the way, we'll talk about in a second, chose not to endorse immediately. So we'll see that play out. But yeah, you're right. It's like Republicans in the Senate are like sending food back at a restaurant. Like you don't want to have to do it, right? It's kind of embarrassing, but you may have to because my chicken's undercooked. And so you have members here of the Senate who are going to try to send their food back. You've got at least 7 Senate Republicans who signed on to legislation that basically reviews the Trade Act, which is the kind of theoretical and legal basis for what the president's up to. So Congress could reassert its authority here. About a dozen Hill Republicans are considering a very same bill. It doesn't take much here for the kind of critical mass to form and for Congress to reassert itself in this fight. So that's going to be, I think, the real telling point. And the question is sort of for how long. Now, Trump, to his kind of consternation, looks at all this and says, you know what, just stop being weak and stupid, literally is a quote from the president to his party. That's a tough sales job too, because not only does he have to kind of navigate this very complicated trade arrangement, but he's also got to work with the Republicans to pass a budget. So another piece of news this week was that basically the House and Senate have got to agree on the budget format. So far, they haven't. The Senate has put together a resolution. The House is considering it, but many of the hardliners in the House say it doesn't go far enough. You need to make more cuts. The president has met with everybody. There was a dinner for the RNCC saying okay, let's get on the same page on this. But a lot of Republicans, especially House Republicans, are coming out saying, we don't trust the Senate to follow through on these cuts, and we don't think the president is going to be able to or willing to make these deep cuts. So that creates a kind of imbalance there and a potential wedge issue for conservative Republicans in the House. What is going to happen? Are we going to get a budget before the House and Senate break for the Passover, Easter recess, or are we going to have to fight this out and come to the brink of a government shutdown?
I don't know, and it's getting more complicated because Democrats, especially in the House, have smelled blood in the water. I don't know how you smell blood in the water, but they have done so, right? So now Hakeem Jeffries, the leader or the minority leader of the Democrats in the House, is trying to have a one-on-one debate with Johnson so they can discuss the budget. And what Democrats are doing to some extent is going public and saying, look, this is I'm quoting here, a reverse Robin Hood maneuver, right? They want to cut things like Medicaid or Medicare, et cetera, and they want to give tax cuts on the trillions to these billionaires. So let's discuss, and then they try to open that gap. And especially in preparation for 2026.
Yeah, and there is this sort of lingering question about tariffs, right? Like Peter Navarro, who is the kind of trade specialist and guru in the White House, is fighting with Elon Musk. So we got two millionaires, billionaires fighting each other about what to do for the economy when people can't buy bread. It's not a good look. And I think that, as you say, the implications for the election are going to be pretty profound. So, we're going to kind of just sort of hope for this to happen and we get a budget resolution. As Donald Trump says, close your eyes and get there is what he says. They're going to have to swallow some hard votes here. And so it's not just about the budget, but, and the cuts that are probably going to be there. And it's also about DOGE, what happens to government services. People can't even call Social Security anymore to get a kind of, clear answer on the phone. And then you've got tariffs where people are struggling to sort of get their 401k balances up. So it's going to be
and the amount of money that is supposed to be coming back to the federal government that we haven't seen because the number of Doge are very dodgy.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, nice alliteration there is pretty clean.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Texas, because the big news this week is that Ken Paxton has officially launched his effort to try to unseat John Cornyn. He's running for U.S. Senate, and this will be what mounts to a pretty bitter primary. The response from the Cornyn campaign was pretty direct. All he said was, Ken Paxton is a fraud. Doesn't that just say it all?
Yeah.
It's going to be kind of an establishment versus this insurgency campaigning, and it'll tell us a lot about the future of what's going to happen in Texas. The insurgents have been battling for years to get the power and to try to unseat a lot of these sort of country club Republicans who have been in power for a long time, the ones who kind of really at the vanguard of moving Texas to the red column in the early 2000s. And now this new group wants to say, your time is done. In fact, Ken Paxton says exactly this, your time is done. So how is this all going to play out in a very bitter primary that is really right around the corner, right? Less than a year away, we're going to see the sparks fly.
Well, it's going to be very bitter. It's going to be very poignant, and it's going to be very aggressive on both sides. I think Paxton has some money. Obviously, Cornyn has a lot of money, and we're still waiting to see what happens to the wild card, the dark horse, stealthy moves here and there, Wesley Hunt, that could suddenly be like, you know what? I'm your guy.
It's guerrilla warfare,
et cetera, et cetera.
This guy went to West Point.
Adult.
I wouldn't mess with him, He also, as a note, he raised about $2 million in the first quarter of this year, kind of very on the sly, right? I don't know if he's going to jump in. Now, that's not clear yet. We've speculated, and he obviously is running ads and stuff with the expectation that he wants to increase his name ID. So maybe it's not this, but something else, because we will see this transition happen in the leadership in the Republican Party. The kind of group that's in there now is going to eventually kind of cycle out, and so a lot of the new generation is going to be a part of it. So if he does jump in, it'll be a real generational fight. But as it is now, Ken Paxton's still going to have to battle his way through a pretty resilient John Cornyn. Cornyn, I think he said something like, he's won 18 straight contests. That's pretty hard to beat. And obviously this Republican primary audience is a little different, but Paxton's a potential liability here. So a couple things actually happened with Paxton this week that are worth noting. It's a kind of good-bad, right? In good news, the Justice Department declined to prosecute Ken Paxton. This actually is something that the Biden Justice Department didn't decide to prosecute. This was a federal investigation that was really the most serious inquiry. Basically, he was able to settle a different fraud case, and corruption allegations eventually get dropped by the FBI. So he's a bit in the clear on this. Some bad news, though, is that Texas judges awarded $6.5 million to 4 senior aides who blew the whistle on Attorney General Ken Paxton's improper firing of them. Basically, they had gone to the FBI saying there's some business here going on that's problematic, and so they got fired as a result. The law is really clear on this, so they're going to get paid at some point. Although Ken Paxton says, this ruling is, a ridiculous judgment, even though they didn't fight it out. And actually, and this is sort of complicated, but as a matter of law, they chose not to contest the charges. So there's really nothing to contest here. So as a matter of literal fact, this is now a kind of known thing. So the judge had basically no choice but to say, you're going to have to pay these people. So I guess my question to you is this. Paxton's had good days and bad days. Sued Biden a bunch of times. The base loves it. Serious liabilities when it comes to some of the fraud issues and sort of ethics things that are happening to his career. Is it going to matter at all?
I don't know. I mean, who knows? Is it going to be harder? Absolutely. Is it going to really, really, really matter? No. Paxton has a base that is very different from that of Cornyn, right? So whatever Cornyn says about Paxton, the base doesn't care.
Yeah, it's like which base shows up, right? And in a year, remember, like we've been talking about, that's going to be rough for Republican incumbents. It could just be the case, like we saw in the specials from a couple of weeks ago, that the base stays home. They don't want to come. So then the question is is it just the sort of most committed true believers, the most kind of aggressive Republicans, the conservatives, like the people who would support Ken Paxton are the only people who come? You shrink the overall turnout and Paxton wins in a kind of narrow race? Or is it the case that, Republicans are resurgent, they want to sort of really see this battle come about and they understand the stakes, so they come out and vote?
It depends. I mean, it's going to be a turnout election. So far we have, serious contenders. Paxton, obviously Cornyn. We need to wait and see what Hunt is going to do. Hunt has, if he enters the game, the capacity to divide and conquer one way or the other, stealing votes from here, stealing a little bit number of votes over there, making real. Very competitive, right?
Probably hurts Paxton more, right? Because Cornyn is going to get his votes. Like, I think those are pretty stable. I don't know how much more he's going to be able to convince people that he's the right choice here. He's already kind of done that. And so it's a turnout question, like you say. But I think Hunt coming in really does take away the momentum from like a challenger to Cornyn. If you didn't like what Cornyn was doing, then Paxton's a good choice. But then you've got Hunt, who presents a kind of more sort of less ethically challenged face, and so maybe you kind of pull back on that.
And then it depends if President Trump supports either Paxton, Cornyn, or Hunt.
Give it to me, because I think you're totally right. Like, basically, Trump is the kingmaker.
Oh, yeah.
If he says one of the three of these people is the choice, then they're probably going to be the choice. I actually don't know what he'll do. Cornyn and Trump have made nice, but Paxton and Trump are close because of the sort of election stuff.
Sure.
Wesley Hunt has been very vocal about support of Donald Trump, especially the tariffs. What's going to happen?
I don't know.
What does Trump do here?
I don't know.
Who does he pick, right?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
It will be. And so I think the point now is that basically that Paxton has got to spend some time raising money. That's going to be job one.
Yeah.
Really, it's going to be fundraising. A lot of what he does is just to say, like he did to blame Dade Phelan for the problem of having to pay the whistleblowers, that it's all about the establishment's fault. They're out to get me, right? They don't want me to do what I'm doing here to kind of make this a more conservative place. That's been a useful tool for Ken Paxton. So he's going to have to start doing that immediately, because as it is, John Cornyn's sitting on a whole bunch of money. So, and actually, Cornyn got the endorsement of the National Border Patrol Council, so he can start to shore up his bona fides when it comes to border control, border security, and immigration issues, which is going to be a big issue for the election for those Republicans. So we'll see how that plays out. But let's talk elections beyond that, though, my friend. There's going to be a lot going on. Glenn Hager has been confirmed as the chancellor of the Texas A&M University system. Whoop. And basically the kind of race is on to see who's going to replace him. Don Huffines, who is a kind of former senator and a kind of conservative stalwart, is thrown his hat in the ring. Christi Craddick, who's currently the chair of the Railroad Commission, also has said that she plans to run. What do you make of this matchup?
Well, I mean, it's going to be very interesting. Christi Craddick has a lot of credentials running or being the incumbent chair of the Texas Railroad Commission. Yeah. So, I think that is something to her advantage. Then on the other hand, you have Don Huffines that has pledged to spend $10 million.
He's rich.
on his campaign, which is an insane amount of money, but fine.
To be controller.
Right. Exactly.
I guess I'm not surprised, though, right? I mean, the stakes are high for all of these races. And there's this assumption that basically when you become controller, that the next step is lieutenant governor, right? So, there's a springboard effect.
Oh, yeah.
That worth spending some money right now to get there.
Right. And finally, he will try to bring Dodge to Texas, but we already have some sort of a Texas Dodge, even before Elon Musk decided to create Dodge.
That's a good point. Yeah,
we're ahead. The Sunset Commission. So, but it's
it sounds good.
It sounds good.
And primary audiences like it, right? So it would sell pretty well, especially if you can make the case that you're willing to spend a bunch of money to make sure that Texas stays red, which is really the issue. If this is an open seat, then you're certainly going to see some Republicans and Democrats fight it out in a general. And if it's a bad year for Republicans, then it could be the case that Democrats try to sneak it in here. This is going to be a pretty ugly fight and over very kind of little stakes. What's interesting to me is that the office of controller has always been one where this sort of is just about counting beans. Literally, you're the state's kind of accountant. Right. And yet now the kind of expectation is that changes to be much more of a kind of conservative version of itself. One element is that they're going to be in charge of watching the money for the putative voucher system, which is likely to pass. Right. That's still in the mix in the House and Senate. So we'll talk about that more next week when things percolate after the budget fight. But basically, that's going to be something that the controller is in charge of. So there is a real renewed sense that this is an important office politically. The controller's office has always been political, right?
Right.
Remember like Bob Bullock when he was basically running down people who hadn't paid their back taxes, or Carol Creighton Strayhorn, who just sadly passed away. She fought with Rick Perry on budget issues and used that to her kind of political advantage. So this is a race that matters in the sense that being controller gives you some serious political power. The other thing too is that, like, if you look at who has released the kind of names for the endorsements, you certainly see a kind of real insurgent grassroots versus kind of Texas mega donors. So some of the people who Huffines put on his list include like Matt Gaetz, Vivek Ramaswamy, Mattress Mac, Brandon Gill, U.S. Rep, obviously from Texas. Christi Craddick has a huge list of Republican donors who are probably more establishment, like Javeed Anwar, Brent Ryan, Kelsey Warren. These are kind of all really Greg Abbott's donors who are kind of, willing to sort of test the waters a bit. So it's going to be a bit of a fight. But and here's how you know it's going to be a fight. So one of the people's on the list was named Glenn Rogers. And remember, Glenn Rogers was the Texas House rep who got ousted from Greg Abbott's purge. And he's been really mad writing op-eds and stuff against this. And so some of the conservatives looked at this and said, you got Glenn Rogers on your list. There's no way you're going to be conservative enough. And what she came back with and said was that you've got the wrong Glenn Rogers. This is actually my dad's orthodontist, who I've known since I was a kid. And so to me, this is a perfect encapsulation of just how vicious this fight's going to be. Every little detail is going to be about kind of who's in power, who's up, who's down, and the conservative kind of fight therein. So that'll be interesting. But we've got more elections, yet more. Oh, Greg Abbott's called a special for CD 18 for November 4th. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, we were expecting that. We discussed last week that, it was going past November 4 was entering in very, very, very murky water. Yeah. So he's doing that, and it opens the race a little bit more competitive, right? Obviously, having more time keeps more time for folks that are planning to run but cannot do it right now. For example, Yolanda Jones, right? That might run, but she's in Austin right now.
This gives her a little bit of a cushion, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, because to announce that you're running now means you're sort of a lame duck in a way. And you're just sort of neglecting your Austin duties in favor of running for something else. So it's a kind of a bad look. And it does kind of crowd the field a bit. Does it change the dynamics? I mean, Christian Menefee, obviously, like we said, has raised a ton of money, got a bunch of endorsements. Amanda Edwards is definitely able to raise a bunch of money. She's put out a list of endorsements. So there's a kind of, definite kind of top cycle of candidates here. But does this change that dynamic like significantly, or how's it going to work? And the second question is, Abbott takes a swipe at Harris County elections, right? The reason we have to have an election in November is because Harris County can't handle it in the short term. Harris County kicks back and says, yeah, we can. Like, we did fine last cycle. There's been hiccups before that. But generally speaking, that's true. So what do you think about that? Is he making this up, or is this like politics, or is it true?
None of the above. But obviously it's politics, right?
Always, right?
I mean, it's impossible to say that they cannot run elections, right? They have run elections. There have been a lot of things, investigations, this and that. The State Department, the Secretary of State has investigated this and that, et cetera. And yes, there have been faults like in any other counties, right? So there has not been any evidence that, just incompetent, period. So yes, it's kind of a
bit of a dodge, right?
Yeah. But
it's hard to say what he's thinking, but for sure the benefit is that if you take one vote away from Democrats in D.C., it's going to make it slightly easier for Republicans. So it gives them until November at least to be able to caper here. But I don't know if it'll change things dramatically, but, this is a marginal fight here that we're seeing, right? In D.C., the number of votes between a kind of victory and defeat is really probably 1, maybe 2. So this could be the sort of spot. And then you think about the people who are in this district, like who need to get attention to issues like they've got a problem with Social Security, or they have a federal grant that they're working through they need help with. These are all things that these citizens really need to have access to. So that's something that's definitely lamentable. Speaking of lamentable, the last thing for the week is that Fort Bend County Democrats have called for County Judge K.P. George to resign upon recent allegations. Natalie Weber, who is one of our colleagues here at Houston Public Media, reports basically that George, who was first elected in 2018 and then later reelected in 2022, has been accused of 2 counts of money laundering up to $150,000. And this is, of course, following previous indictments on unrelated criminal charges for allegedly faking racist attacks against his own campaign on social media. Do you think that his fight to keep his seat is going to work?
Well, it's going to be a fight. As you said, the chair of the Democratic Party in Fort Bend County has asked for his resignation. Yeah. Obviously, Republicans in Commissioner's Court have also asked for his resignation. Yeah. So the pressure is amounting and increasing and increasing and increasing. You have already some people indicating that they want to run and they want to participate in the primary.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very complicated.
Yeah, and this is a definite kind of purple county, right? The people who are winning these down ballot elections are only winning by about 1%. Democrats typically.
Correct.
George only won by about 3%, 4%. So it's a really close fight. We know politicians can survive scandals, but they have to have unity of their party. He doesn't have that. So it could be a real problem for them to hold this seat, and the flip could be meaningful. Having 4 years of a county judge of a different party is like a tremendous amount of time. We saw this in
and
County.
It's in preparation, right?
Yeah.
It's in preparation. Perhaps the Democratic Party is looking in terms of what are we going to do there or not. But obviously, that's going to be something that we're going to keep tracks for the next couple of weeks. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.